This is the finished product of what we're going to be building today. Crosscut saw vise. Ancient technology predating the chainsaw. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. So stick around. Greetings. Today I'm going to talk about how to build a saw vise for sharpening crosscut saws. These antique saws are classic and the tool of choice for cutting wood out of trails in wilderness areas. So if you want to be a saw filer and refurbish and maintain these beautiful tools, you're going to need a vise. So I bought some lumber from Home Depot to build one using an image from Dolly Chapman's website as my guide for what I wanted to build. So after I set my saw blade on top of a 2x6, I had two of these, to gauge the length, I cut both to about a little over 7 feet, actually right around 7 feet, because that's about the max length of a saw I'm going to be working with on this specific vise. Typically I'll be using sharpening saws in the 5 to 6 foot range. And this was pretty cheap timber, which was pretty rough from the sawmill it came from, so I used this belt sander to smooth the surface, clean up this wood a little bit. My next step was to belt sand down my two legs, one on each side, for the vise. Get those nice and clean as well, and then vacuum up the dust. Now if you're watching this and you're going to do this yourself, make sure you have good ventilation for any dust you kick up, and a good respiratory mask to keep that fine dust particle from going in your lungs. So next we put a longer eye bolt on our 2x6 and we just trace out its shape, because we need to drill a hole on either side for those eye bolts, and then trace out their indentation, and you'll see in a moment how those come to work. And then we just put our actual saw on the 2x6 and draw some holes in there that we're gonna drill through so that we can use bolts to hold these two pieces of wood together and prop, so it will not only prop up the saw blade in the vise but also clamp it tight within the vise. So that's what we're doing here, and then we're getting our holes on our first two pieces of our legs to hold the saw. Alright, so now we're just using a 1/2 inch spoon bit to widen up those holes a little bit more so that they fit our bolts. And now that that is done, we will use a chisel to chisel out a space for the eye bolts to fit within the two 2x6s that clamp down on the saw. So this may seem confusing right now, but just hang out and you'll see what we're going for here. But the concept is you run one eye bolt through the two eye bolts and then connect your wood post to the other eye bolt, and with those two eye bolts you hold the two 2x6s together, and then you have a pivot point for the vise on the post leg. So we've done this on one side, we're going to do it on the other side. If you have experience hand tool woodworking, you probably are better at this than I am. But the second side went easier than the first one. Still, same idea, and I'm experimenting with some different power tools here, but just use what you got and try and figure out a way to do this so it works for you. You can see this chisel is really doing the best job compared to the power tools. And we got a nice fit there. Pop it through the 2x4, and it looks good. Now we can do a test of the assembly by sandwiching the 2 eye bolts together with the two 2x6s, pop it up on its leg, do the same thing on the other side, using a little bit of WD-40 as a thread lubricant, and we have a minimally viable product. Next, we're going to use the remainder of our eye bolts to run those through our board so that we can clamp the vise together. So that's what we're doing here. And I ran out of hardware, so I just had to use what I had to test fit this saw blade in and just see how it worked, and it worked well. The next step of the process was to finish building the legs. So I hung the vise up from the rafters in the garage from one of the eye bolts using some rope, and then drew out the angles on the leg board and then cut those with the chop saw. My original plan was to use 2 holes, one as an attachment bolt and another one is like a placement bolt with the leg, but you'll see that with the final variation of this, I did not end up doing that. Another thing is I didn't take perfect measurements. I just kind of eyeballed the foot length here on both sides. So they are slightly different heights, and I could have just standardized those from the beginning and it probably would have worked out better. You can also see how this is not really an A-frame. It's kind of like a sideways A-frame, and so having a better, like, I would say like V frame for your legs is what you want. You're going to have more stability that way. And then the higher you go to start your arch, the more stability you're going to be. So if I had to do this over, I would incorporate those 2 design principles into the leg design to just make a better, easier supported leg system for the saw vise. You can see in this view that the second leg is almost a foot lower than the first leg, and it's midway down the leg, which really, you know, if you oppose the legs, it doesn't mess you up too much, but it's not as optimal as it could be in terms of stability. So this may be something I redo in the future. We'll see. For now, I just want to get it built and working and, you know, sharpen some saws and see how that goes first. So just checking the level and adjusting the legs accordingly. And you can see with this final iteration just how wide the legs are to create really good stability. After that, we tested again by popping in a saw blade and just seeing how that feels on the vise, seeing how stable everything is. Make sure you're using closed-toed shoes and just better PPE than I am in this shot. There's no reason to get a puncture wound if things go wrong. So once I finished framing out the rough design and testing it, I went ahead and put some primer paint on all the wood, and then I realized I need to get a curve in here. So that's what I started drawing out on the 2 2x6s so that they could curve with the crosscut saw blades that are held by them in the future. I also wanted to bevel the edge, so create a curve and bevel the edge that would make filing at an angle easier. So once I got my lines drawn, started using some power tools to cut the wood at an angle, which was harder than I thought. And through some trial and error, we got it done. However, I used a combination of techniques by using the battery-powered skill saw to cut as far as I could get cutting, vacuuming up things the dust in between, and then using the handsaw to further the cut. So that was my strategy here. Also trying to cut from both sides. The jigsaw probably would have been a good option. I just don't have a great one right now, so I just used the skill saw. Then I just started going at it with the chisel and then the planers to introduce the curved beveled edge. I actually spread this work out over the course of a few months because of my busy schedule with work, family, childcare, other hobbies. So it really went from late spring to midsummer before I got it all done, which was not as optimal as just giving it dedicated time consistently every day or every other day until it was done. But you just got to do what you can do. So this is another planing shot of what I believe is the first board. This took longer than I thought, and yet I wanted to give it the time it needed because this is the tool that you need to sharpen every saw. And if I have any chance of ever becoming a master filer or even just someone capable of refurbishing an old saw such that it can be used effectively in a field environment, I want to make sure I done what I can to build a good vise to do that. So after planing, we did some sanding, get everything nice and smooth. Got my respirator on this time, so that's great, protecting those lungs. And once things were smooth, we were good to go. Then I repeated the exact same process on the other side of the 2x6. I'm going to skip through all this because we just watched it one time, and so you'll only see this beginning portion. Now that the curves were done on both 2x6s and the beveled edges, I went ahead and put a final coat of blue paint on everything, which really became like 3 coats of paint on the 2x6s because they basically had to be reprimed, and then maybe 2 coats of paint on everything else. This is, good outdoor paint that I got off the discount shelf at Home Depot, so it was only like $10 for the gallon, and hopefully it will allow this wood to last a really long time, even if it's stored outside in inclement weather. Hopefully I can store it inside though. We'll see. All right, now it's time for final assembly. First things first though, I got these fabric felt pieces from Amazon, and I used a staple gun to staple them to the inside edges of the saw vise. The idea is to just create a good surface for that blade to stick to when it's in the vise. And when I did some research for this project, it looked like some of the older saw vises had this felt layer, so I wanted to try it out too. After that, I had to re-drill my holes a little bit so that the bolts would fit through. There's some paint in those holes, so that needed to be widened out. But after that, it's just a matter of getting my bolts through. Now, I took about a month and a half between when I painted this and did the final assembly, so I was kind of going off memory on how to put this together, and using these long lag bolts was the wrong bolt to use. I needed to use the shorter ones that were fully threaded, which meant that I had to do what you're seeing now all over again. Fortunately, this time lapse makes it look like it's going very quickly, but it did take a good amount of time. And I made this mistake on both sides before I realized that I needed to fix it and just use these shorter bolts to go all the way through. So live and learn. Back out the eye bolts, pop in the new ones, and go from there. So with the correct eye bolts in, not fully tight, I was able to put my legs back on one side at a time and then stand up my vise. Went ahead and hung it from the rafter again, and then decided not to put the leg pieces back on. And just another kind of slow process of, guessing and checking my way through this reassembly. Bolt holes were quite tight, so kept re-drilling those through to get them the way I wanted. And tightening these eye bolts just takes time. Don't have a drill attachment for them. So yeah, initially I was planning to use 2 bolts, one that would kind of just slide in and out, and another one to hold both leg pieces together. Instead, I put 2 very small threaded eye bolts in the bottom of each leg, and then just use P-cord to hold the A-frames together at a specified length that could be more easily adjusted to ensure stability of the leg system. This is me still not figuring that out yet and experimenting with the first direction of using 2 bolts. Alright, now it's time to drill some pre-holes for the first eye bolt. I'll do it for the second one. I should have driven that eye bolt further in, and I did that better on the other side. But on this side I didn't. I don't think it will hurt it too much, but you'll just, if you're pulling in shear, you're gonna have less of a bend radius if you put your eye bolt all the way through. So there we go. Got a little trucker stitch on one side and then just a 1/2 inch on the other. And we are tightening our loose bolts to stability now. And then using the staple gun to finish fixing our felt surface, which now we have a bit of a rainbow pattern, which is totally cool, to our saw vise. It also visually illustrates the midpoint pretty well, so that's also cool. Now we just drill through our additional holes and test popping this thing open. Don't want to put a finger in there though. And now we can set a crosscut saw blade in and see how it feels. Pretty nice to get to this point in the project. Oh yeah. Don't have my through bolts in yet though, so we need to get those going. So this is a spot where these longer bolts I originally purchased from Home Depot that aren't fully threaded all the way through, they work just fine because honestly I can get enough tension on the saw blade, at least at this stage in the process, from some of the other shorter ones. And these I want wide enough holes that I can just, pretty easily slide them through. I don't want to have to hammer them through or thread them through individually. So that's what we got there. And with just one more washer really and one more nut, we're good to go. If you're watching this at home and you have ideas on how I could improve this design, please let me know in the comments below. In any case, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you around.